Dr. Sergei Kurginyan, President of the International Public Foundation Experimental Creative Center, Mr. Frank van Bunningen, Head of the Counter-Terrorism and National Security Division, Ministry of Foreign Affairs from the Netherlands, and Brigadier General Nitzan Nuriel, Director of the Counter-Terrorism Bureau of Israel. I will begin by having the honor of introducing Professor Bassam Tibi, who is a very, very interesting person. Bassam Tibi is Professor Emeritus of International Relations. Between 1973 and 2009, he taught at the University of Goettingen. Parallel to this position, he was a non-resident AD, white professor at large at Cornell University from 2004 to 2010. He concluded his academic career with a sabbatical spent with an appointment as a visiting research fellow at Yale University. Tibi was born in Damascus and descends from the centuries-old family Banu al-Tibi of the Damascene nobility, Ashraf. Among his books are 9 monographs written in English and published in the United States. Tibi's published major articles appeared in journals worldwide. He is often blamed for being Europeanized, though a Muslim, who has been educated in Damascus in Islamic and Western schools. In his birthplace, he received his high school education with a French baccalaureate. In 1962, he came to Germany to study social science, philosophy, and history. His academic training was at the Wolfgang von Goethe University of Frankfurt, where he obtained his first PhD in 1971. Among his academic teachers were the Holocaust survivors Max Horkheimer and Theodor W. Adorno. Tibi was habilitated to Dr. Habil, German super PhD, hereafter at the University of Hamburg. Professor Tibi, the floor is yours.
Thank you for this generous introduction, and I hope I can stand up to the expectation you have raised, and I humble. But I have to trust you how moved I am. I mean, not only for being back in this country. When I landed this morning at 4 o'clock in Tel Aviv, the first recollection was a walk on the promenade of Tel Aviv with the still living best historian in the world. He's now 93 years old, and I guess you know who that is, Bernard Lewis. 11 years ago, we were walking 2 hours on the Corniche of Tel Aviv, and within 2 hours, he taught me world history in 2 hours. Yeah, that was so great. And I just talked to him on the phone. Yeah, and I told him I'm in Tel Aviv, and I would never forget this teaching of world history in 2 hours while walking in Tel Aviv. Yeah, I mean, people like Bernard Lewis and my academic teachers, Max Horkheimer and Adorno. I think I received a letter. I mean, this is not my subject matter, but I will not take more than 1 minute. I was last year as the first Muslim, as the Rosnick Scholar for the Study of Anti-Semitism at the U.S. Memorial Holocaust Museum, and I received this week a letter from one of the directors there. He wanted to know a name of a Muslim Arab scholar who has a proper understanding of the Holocaust, other than me, because it is important to cite other people. And I tell you, I failed to find the name, because it's very difficult, and in order to understand what the Holocaust is, what the plight of the Jewish people, you must have lived and spent some time with Holocaust survivors, and that was my privilege, that I had Adorno and Horkheimer as my teachers for almost 1 decade, and they changed my life. Yeah, otherwise I wouldn't be here. Yeah, okay. I will be giving a keynote address here, and I was told 20 minutes, and I have, combination of Arab, French, German, American ways of life, and one of them is to keep time. Yeah, I was allowed to talk 20 minutes. It's now 5:30, and 5:50 I will stop. 5:50 precise. My keynote address will be about the delegitimation of jihadist terrorism in a war of ideas. And to legitimate this approach, I want to start with 2 things. One of which is 1 year after 9/11, I was with the American ambassador to Indonesia, in Jakarta, in Indonesia, in a dialogue between Islam and the West to avoid the abuse or misuse of 9/11 to further a kind of polarization between the West and the world of Islam. Yeah? And the American ambassador to Indonesia at the time, his name is Ralph Doyce, we participated in what we named a dialogue in the world of disorder. And I argued there that it is very important, while countering terrorism, to establish a Muslim Western joint venture of security, and that security has to be part of the dialogue. And this is a very unpopular view. And to support the idea how unpopular is it, last year, or no, it was this year, the Minister for Internal Affairs in Germany, in the dialogue, there's a dialogue between the diaspora community in Germany and the Muslim state to establish a peaceful avenues for recognizing Muslims living in Germany as a community. And the Minister of Internal Affairs said, we must add to the issue areas we discussed security. And the first thing, within 2 or 3 minutes, all walked out, said security is not a part of the dialogue. And I believe if you, in our time, if you do not add security and counter-terrorism to the dialogue, then dialogue is nothing. Yeah? This is very important because there's another story which I want to refer to before beginning with my presentation, is every time when I travel into the world of Islam, yeah, and I lived in 20 different Islamic countries, also beyond the Arab world, in Southeast Asia and West Africa, and over every time there, when I talk about terrorism and countering terrorism, you hear the pronouncement that the war and terror is a war on Islam. And this is not only articulated by Islamists. I make a distinction between Islam and Islamism. By ordinary Muslims believe war and terror is a war on them. Yeah? And it is very important to take this seriously and to do something against it, because if this perception prevails, the war and terror will not be successful. Yeah? So terror for me is not only a violence. Terror is also about the order of the world. The subject matter of my presentation is that to deal with the Islamist branch of terrorism is a thorny way. It is is like entering a dangerously mined field. And even if you are a Muslim, I'm a Muslim, and I come not only Muslim by faith, but I'm grateful to the chairman. You can read it. It's not a pretension. There's a history of the city of Damascus, is established history of 800 pages, Mukhtarat Tawarikh Dimashq, compiled about 100 years ago by Al-Husayni. And there's a chapter about my family in it, and it says that the Qadis and the Muftis of the city of Damascus from the 13th throughout the 19th century were from my family, and I grew up in this environment, so Islam is a part of my identity. And even somebody like me, who has very, very deep and well-proven Islamic credentials, is subject to defamation as bashing Islam or engaging in Islamophobia. This is a part, the war on terror is also a war of ideas, and this is what I shall elaborate on. Yeah? Let me first allude to two extremes to prove to you how difficult it is to address these issues that I am addressing. One extreme is Western, and the other extreme is Islamist. And I will come later to the distinction between Islam and Islamism. I lived last year, most of the year, I retired 2009, and last year I spent most of the year in Washington, D.C., primarily working at the Holocaust Museum. And there I was exposed to the ideas of John Brennan, the security advisor of President Obama. In a speech in Washington, I was there, and he argued that violence, also violence of Al-Qaeda and also other jihadists, it is not more than an illegitimate resort to violence. It is not linked to religion, and one has to look at it as just violence. Yeah, and if you have studied jihadism well, you cannot agree. And also, one can excuse Mr. Brennan with a reference to the fact he's not a scholar. So how should he know that? Yeah, but in a book published by MESA is the authoritative association of students of the Middle East in the United States, Middle East Studies Association of North America. The book is Islamism and published last year by Stanford University Press. And if you study jihadism, so the argument of the book is, it is written by 12 scholars, then you are associating Islam with violence, and then you are hurting Islam and Muslims. Yeah? This is a scholarly book, but they said, I'm a Muslim, but if somebody criticizes jihadist violence, why should I feel attacked? I do it myself. Yeah. So this one extreme is a kind of apologetic and establishing obstacles in the way of enlightening about what is jihadist terrorism. But there's another extreme. The other extreme is to view Islamic jihad, not jihadism, Islamic jihad, as a source of evil, and to profile Islam and Muslims and say the source of the troubles are the Muslims and Islamic civilization. So you are torn between apologetics of Islam and between people who engage in the defamation of Islam. And we need sound analysis. We need more scholarly, more known analysis. The issue is has to be based on facts. A few years ago, there's an Israeli friend from the Bar Ilan University. We engaged a few years ago in a project about Islamism and security, and there was, I forgot the name, there were two Israeli professors fighting one another, and one professor said to the other, you have the right to your own opinion, but you do not have the right to your own facts. Yeah? So facts and opinion have to be separated. So we have to go beyond opinion, look at the facts. The facts is there's a global phenomenon of religious fundamentalism. It is not only related to Islam, it exists in all religions. And there's an authoritative work about that by two scholars, American scholars, Martin and Scott Appleby. They published 5 volumes with Chicago University Press, and I had the honor to be part of the venture. We studied religious fundamentalism in all religions, so we are not profiling Islam, we're looking at a global phenomenon. Fundamentalists are people who have something to do with religion. They are not only criminals or violent people, they look at themselves as the defenders of God. And you have to take this seriously at the value phase, what they say about themselves. And then thirdly, religious fundamentalism has a violent and a non-violent branch. The violent branch of fundamentalism is not about violence. It is about the order of the world. And this is more serious than just violence. I dissociate myself from the extremes mentioned, extremes of defamation and the extreme of apologetics, while I address the issue with no escapes. There are many escapes for dealing with this issue. I operate on 4 premises. The first premise is the distinction between Islam and Islamism. I'll come to this later on with more details. Second, the distinction between jihad and jihadism. The word for jihadism is jihadiyya, and the word for Islamism in Arabic is al-Islamiyya. And the first person who used the term Islamism is not as some American scholars believe, somebody who has some prejudice about Islam. The first person who used the term al-Islamiyya, Islamism, was the founder of Islamism, Hassan al-Banna. So, I mean, this is so. we are talking about facts. First distinction between Islam and Islamism. Second distinction between jihad and jihadism. Al-Banna coined also the term jihadism, al-jihadiyya. Jihadism is not about mere violence. This is my third premise is not about mere violence. It is an irregular war. And I have very limited time. I have coined the term irregular war, and I argue terrorism is more just violence. It is irregular war. It's a new pattern of war. And then the fourth premise is one needs, next to considering the distinctions I have presented to you, to be careful not to profile Islam and also not to profile Islamism. Because it is wrong, but in terms of fact, it is wrong to identify Islamism with terrorism, because they are Islamists who are more successful, by far more successful than Islamists who engage with violence. They are non-violent Islamists who are more successful than violent Islamists. Compare the late bin Laden with Erdogan. Yeah? Erdogan is more successful than bin Laden, and Erdogan is against violence, yeah, and also against terror, but he's an Islamist. Yeah? My thesis is the basic idea of my thinking about the matter in point relates to a reality of a new Cold War, and this new Cold War is fought as a war of ideas. Like, if you criticize Islamism, you are accused of Islamophobia, of bashing Islam, and successfully in the United States is very successful, less in Europe, but in Europe it's emulating with the United States. So there's a war of idea, and the war of idea, there are many books published in the United States about the war of ideas, and all the authors of these books argue the war of ideas is a war between democracy and jihadism, and this has been launched since 9/11. This is wrong, because the term Harb al-Afkar means in Arabic war of idea, was coined by Sayyid Qutb, and Sayyid Qutb is the rector spiritus of Islamism. Now, let's come to the distinctions, Islam and Islamism. Islam is a religion, is a faith, is a cult in terms of religious practice. It is also a culture, everyday culture. And we are in the Middle East, and 20% of the population of Israel is Palestinian. Most of them are Muslims, but they are not Islamists. So Islam is a daily culture. So Islamism is a political ideology. Of course, there has been links between Islam and politics in Islamic history, and I am aware of the fact that Islam was used hundreds of times or thousands of times for legitimacy, as a legitimacy device in the course of Islamic history to legitimate power. But Islam is not a political ideology in the modern sense. And Islam is not a political religion. There's a notion of political religion coined for communism and for fascism, but not for religion. But I argue now there is a politicization of religion worldwide, and the outcome are political religions. And Islamism is a political religion in a modern sense, political ideology in a modern sense. And if you study Islamism, and I have been studying professionally Islamism since 1980, now 31 years. I've been studying Islam since I was born. I'm studying. I learned the Quran by heart on the breast of my head, on the breast of my mother. My mother was a very religious woman. God bless her. She's gone, and she passed away. And I learned the Quran in the age between 5 and 6. So, I mean, this is a part of studying Islam, but studying Islamism since 1980. And I worked, not just for 1 week or in hotels. I lived and worked in 20 different Islamic countries, and I have interviewed about 2,500 Islamists. And I read what they write. And the major belief, the major notion of belief of Islamism is that Islam is not only deen, it is also dawla, deen wa dawla. The notion was coined also by Hassan al-Banna. Deen al-dawla means unity of religion and state. I know the Quran by heart, and while aging I forget, but the term, I know for 100% sure that the term dawla, which means state, in Turkish devlet, does not occur in the Quran. I once went to I mean, just as an American way, even though the time is passing, I allow myself. Americans, when I started my American career, also 30 years ago, I was told it's important to insert jokes and anecdotes in presentation to keep people awake. Yeah? I was in a fruit shop in the city where I lived in Germany, owned by a Turk, and he had this formula, din udevlet in Turkish, in Arabic din wa dawla, and I asked him where he got that. He said it is mentioned in the Quran. He said it's mentioned in the Quran. This Islam is din wa dawla, and I told him I come from a Qadi and Mufti family, and I tell you something: God will torture you. God will burn you. And the term adab, to make somebody miserable, feel miserable, also physically in the hell. Yeah, when you go to hell, you learn what that you will be exposed to God, to Allah adab. He said, what did I do? He said, you are falsifying God's word. These terms do not come in the Quran. He said, but they told me these are terms in the Quran. And I said, in the week after, I went to the shop and the sign was gone. So believe me, many Islamists, or a majority of Islamists who are not learned Muslims, to be Muslim is not to be learned Muslim, they have not read the Quran very well, and they do not know that the term dawla, or the term government, hukuma, the term hakama, occur in the Quran, but in the meaning to judge. So Islamism about the order of the state and the order of the world. It is not about violence. Violence is there's a resort to violence, but violence is always limited with targets. And you can argue that Islamists use violence in a Clausewitzian sense. They are rationalists. They say war, the war of jihadism, is a war. It is a continuation of politics with other means. Yeah? It is not only about violence. Therefore, we have to be careful of limiting the approach of countering terrorism to just narrow understanding of violence and narrow understanding of military means. Yeah? The source of this thinking at Al-Banna, and it's continued, and the writing of Al-Banna are used in the indoctrination of Islamism throughout the world, at least the part of the world that I've seen. There is a need for fighting terror. We are here to engage in a thinking about countering terrorism. Delegitimation of the ideology that legitimates the resort of violence in the name of Islam is a part of counter-violence. And I believe this cultural aspect of fighting terrorism is as important as this military security-related aspect of terrorism. So Islamism as a political ideology is not Islam. If you pass this message to Muslims in a very convincing manner, you may help them to evade violence. One of my friends was Minister of Religious Affairs, Waqf, in the government of Mubarak. His name is Mahmoud Zakzouk, and he told me, we were close friends, and he told me that he sent professors of Al-Azhar to jails to spend hours with jihadists to convince them that what they are doing is not in line with Islam. And he reported to me that was successful. I mean, of course, this has a limited impact, but it makes sense to do that. And also, it makes sense to tell the people Islam is not Islamism, and jihadism, a jihadiyah, is not jihad. The classical jihad is a war, is a traditional war, but jihadism is terrorism. The traditional jihad is not about terror because it is a warfare. But jihadism has also a warfare. It is an irregular warfare. It's a war without rules. Yeah? And this war is also fought. My time is over. Can I speak more 5 minutes? Yes? Yeah? Okay, thank you. Thank you for generosity. So, this war happens also as a war of idea, as fought as a war of idea, and unfortunately with Western soldiers. In the past, since 1980, I spent part of the year in the United States, part of the year in Europe, and part of the year in the world of Islam. So I know the United States very well, and I'm sorry, but I think you know that. Islamism has a lot of intellectual soldiers in the American academe, in the American Islamic and Middle Eastern studies. Yeah? So the war of ideas is fought not with clear lines, here are Islamists and there are the al-kafirun, the unbelievers. And many Westerners believe Islamism is a liberation theology. Islamism is a legitimation of the uprising of the deprived and the oppressed people. And it is very important to explain this. Islamism is a new variety of totalitarianism. I read Hannah Arendt, and I found the thinking of Hannah Arendt very apt to interpret the tenets of Islamism. Yeah? We need, first, we need to establish proper knowledge about the issues. Yeah? This is, knowledge is academic, but also there is no separation between academia and everyday's public life, public policy. Yeah? We need to establish proper knowledge about Islamism, about jihadism, to protect Muslims and also non-Muslims from wrong misconceptions, wrong thinking about Islamism. The book Islamism is a Middle East Studies Association of North America books published by Stanford University Press, is now one of the major books on this subject. And if you read it, then it is a warning to be critical about Islamism, then you will be accused of Islamophobia. Yeah? We should not submit to the demand that there's no distinction between Islamism and Islam. There's a senator in the American Congress, I don't want to mention his name, in a meeting in Washington, he said, those who distinguish between Islam and Islamism engage in lies. There is no such thing, there's only one Islam. And he reminded me, this US senator reminded me of an event I was once at Al-Azhar University about 10 years ago, and I was thinking about enlightened Islam and continuing enlightened traditions of Islam in our modern history. I was quoting Al-Jabiri and other enlightened contemporary Muslim thinkers who passed away. Al-Jabiri passed away, Markoon passed away. And one person stood up and he said to me, Mr. Tibi, you have lived long in the West and you have forgotten about Islam. And said to me, I asked him, please tell me what I have forgotten about Islam. He said, you have forgotten there's only one Islam. And Islam is not a buffet. You cannot take this and leave this. You take it or you leave it. And I said, this is your Islam, this is not my Islam. Yeah? My Islam is characterized by diversity. We have to forge alliances, especially in the light of the Arab Springs with Arab Muslim liberals. Now there's a fight in Egypt between liberal Muslims and the Muslim Brothers. Yeah? And the Muslim Brothers, unfortunately, are enjoying support, also support of the United States. Yeah? When Obama was in Cairo, I was told that there were 15 leading Muslim brothers attending his presentation with his consent. Yeah? I have been told that the Muslim Brothers of Syria, my country of origin, are negotiating with some Americans unofficially in Turkey. And there's a person, I don't want to mention his name, but I can mention the journal in which he published, Foreign Affairs, where he says liberal Muslims are a slice and we should ignore them. If we want to deal with Muslim today, we have to deal with the Muslim Brothers. This is published in Foreign Affairs, and this person consults the State Department. I'm very sorry to hear that. Yeah? And so we need to forge alliances, and we need to Arab Muslim liberals are weak, but they are not insignificant slice. And so to solve the Middle East conflict is very important. I say that in Israel is very important. But if you solve the Middle East conflict and the Palestinian problem, this is very important. This will not be enough. This will not be enough to do away with Islamism and also with its terrorist branch. Because when Muslim, I keep presenting this argument, and I end with it, not to please you, but because it is a fact. When the Muslim Brothers was established in 1928, there was no Israel, there was no Arab-Israeli conflict, and so the concern of the Muslim Brothers by then and Hassan al-Banna were different concerns. And so it is a pretext to argue one of the reasons of all these problems is the existence of Israel and the Arab-Israeli conflict. Of course, the Arab-Israeli conflict, and in particular the Palestinian conflict, has to be resolved to the satisfaction of all, but this is one of the very few requirements for dealing with the issue. The issue is much larger, and I congratulate you and also for my friend Boaz for this meeting. This is a contribution for meeting the challenge. We are facing a great challenge, and I have to say the West is not up to meeting this challenge. Thank you very much.